Welcome back to the Forging Alpha podcast, where we talk about lifestyle, fitness, nutrition, mindset, and all those things that it takes to live a great life.
Level it up.
Level it up, baby.
Welcome. What are we talking about this week, Ricky?
Today we're talking about scarcity mindset and abundance mindset. Some of the differences between the two, kind of defining what they are and how that applies to life.
Good deal.
So a lot of people probably have heard of scarcity mindset, abundance mindset across the board.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not. So I think we should probably jump into kind of defining what those are, or what we consider them to be, and go from there.
Yeah. I think listen, if you're probably listening to this podcast, then maybe you have, maybe you haven't. I think it's probably something scarcity mindset wise that the majority of people in today's society live with. I think that across the board, whether you know what that is or whether you don't, I think that it's natural human nature to be scarcity minded, unless you grew up in an environment that wasn't, or you have forged yourself into a mindset that is an abundance mindset.
Right.
I think these things are more applicable, and we get the point across when we talk about it from personal experience. So in my mind, I think that I am especially naturally inclined towards the scarcity mindset. And the scarcity mindset, and what I would define it as, is anything that is scarce in nature, whether that be physical, mental, monetarily, money-wise, and that you think that there's either not enough of it out there to go around, that you are limited in some aspect or by something, and it's essentially just holding things tight, not letting go of certain things because of fear. At the end of the day, I think scarcity comes down to a fear-based mentality that you live by. And I mean, you look across the board with society, most people live their lives fear-based, whereas abundance mindset is an aspect and an outlook on life where, whether that's career-based, whether that's collaborations with people, doing business with other people, whether that's success, you look at it with a glass half full versus the glass half empty. So, putting it in those terms, I think would be the simplest way to describe how I look at scarcity versus abundance mindset. I think that abundance takes a lot more attention and effort, unless you're just one of those people that was born that way. And I think we know those people. I think that they end up being more of the successful people in our worlds, and they're the people that you're probably drawn to naturally. They tend to bring life into a room. They tend to be the ones that are connectors of people, connectors of business, and they just live life looking at it from more of a positive outlook. They're not worried about holding things tight, that there's not enough to go around, and they are willing to share with things because they're confident what they are. They don't look at things as just competition, or that somebody can't get something and you at the same time can obtain something. So what would you say? Well, how would you define it, if you would, any differently?
I mean, I think you did a pretty good job of defining kind of what it is, but something that I think about is it's two things. One, it's kind of on a spectrum. Like, it's not necessarily, do you have a scarcity mindset or do you have an abundance mindset? But a lot of times it'll be on a range. And I've noticed in my own life times where I've had more of a scarcity mindset and more of an abundance mindset. And I always get better results when I have the abundance mindset, but it can be tricky to remember that and to practice the things that keep you in that abundance mindset if it's not your quote unquote default setting, which for most people, I don't think it is. But that essentially becomes the lens that you see the whole world through.
Yeah.
So it could apply to your health. It could apply to business. It could apply to relationships. It could apply to really anything that you're dealing with.
That's a good point. Yeah. So let's dive into some of the tactical, practical stuff. Where in your life has that come into play, whether positively or negatively, and where are you working to improve or grow in that aspect of your abundance mindset? Because it kind of sounds airy fairy, like it sounds kind of like the manifestation stuff, but at the end of the day, like if you want to change your outside circumstances, you literally have to change the way you think
100%.
first and foremost. It's almost like planning to do something before you do that. I think Abe Lincoln had a phrase where if I'm going to cut down a tree and I'm going to spend, and I've got 6 hours to do it, I'm going to spend the first 5 hours sharpening my axe.
Yep.
Versus trying to attack something with a dull axe. I think your brain and the way you approach things in life, if you're not doing it with a plan, which we talk so much about and how big of a deal that is, it's probably not going to be the best way of approaching life. And you're probably going to make more mistakes and it's going to be more difficult than it might be. So I'll let you take from there.
Yeah. And if you have a scarcity mindset, you tend to be thinking at kind of a small level. And a lot of times you got to be thinking at a larger level or a bigger level so that you can get out of whatever situation that you might be in. And I think that there's probably a lot of people, myself included, that kind of grew up in a bit of a scarcity mindset environment. So that can be really tough to kind of break some of those habits and cycles. And until you take the time to like do some of the reflection on that, to study abundance and scarcity and recognize it in your own life, it might be hard to see how it has impacted you. But that's definitely something I'm kind of dealing with right now, is leaning into the abundance mindset and thinking at a bigger level.
Yep.
And I think a big part of that is gratitude and like being thankful for just things in general, but also not looking at the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and more so looking at like the progress that you've made thus far. That can be really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think that not just thinking small, but also thinking like in negativity.
Yeah.
Right. Like that plays into a scarcity mindset of you are not good enough. You're not doing enough, because the aspect of kind of scarcity also goes into maybe the environment you grew up with where that was a fact. And I think it's scarcity ultimately is limitation, right? It's a limitation in whatever capacity it's telling you you're not good enough, you can't do X, Y, and Z. And so whether that's not thinking big enough or negatively, I can see how that would all play into scarcity.
Yeah. And like the power of positive thinking, like kind of sounds just like you were saying, a little airy fairy type situation, but the attitude that you go through life with makes such a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely been times in my life that I haven't had an awesome attitude, and like I was saying earlier, the results go with that.
Yeah.
So if you can keep that top of mind and kind of focus on that throughout your life, that's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. I think the challenge too becomes like it almost seems like you're not being realistic, right? Mm-hmm. For me, like it's the personal dialogue of like automatically going to, you're not doing enough, don't be a pussy, you need to challenge yourself, everything needs to be like pushed to the limits. And I think that there's time and a place for that. But also I think that, and for a lot of dudes, if that is always the natural thing, like is that benefiting you at that certain point? Kind of the David Goggins thing. Like there is a time and a place for the David Goggins mentality, but I feel like that also ends up being a limiter at times, right? Because if you're consistently beating yourself up for that, is that just leaving you in a hole of thinking you're stupid and you're focusing on the problem versus the solution? I think that's where the fine line is. Like, all right, is this actually promoting action that's getting you towards a solution, or is it keeping you in that hamster wheel of negative thinking and focusing just on the problem, which is super easy to do?
Humans are incredibly good at finding the negative and being able to pick that out. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, but it makes sense if you think about it evolutionary wise, because back in the day when we were running from the lions and tigers and stuff, kind of a big deal to be able to recognize threats or what seems to be a threat. But unfortunately, a lot of people still go through life perceiving things as a threat or something negative. And just like you said, it just kind of makes this cascading downward spiral of staying in that negative loop.
Yeah. I'm going to use an example for me. Like I'm a pretty cheap bastard when it comes to money. For example, like growing up, even from like a kid, my mom would always say that I love like saving money, being chintzy with that, which I think that in the scarcity aspect, it can be a positive in some instances, but it's also limiting your ceiling in a lot of aspects. And so for like me, I write a 5-figure check to coaches and mentors every single year now. Like that's not an easy thing to do, but that mentality that people have of always, let's use money for that consistent example. If you're never investing into things that are going to get you to the next level, and it's always just across the board, I'm not going to spend money. Like I'm looking at every single aspect of what I spend and budgets and all of that. While that is a smart thing because you don't want to be like fiscally irresponsible, the people that I see that are like that into their older ages, they are not the top echelon of successful people,
Right.
because they don't take any risks. They're not betting on themselves. Everything has to be a guarantee, a safety measure. And that's where like there's scarcity in that, because it's almost like a distrust in their skill set or in the plan from God or the plan of what is going to come out on the other side by, like for money, like investing in those things or spending money on those things and knowing that eventually like it's going to come back to them. Like if you're living in that, I need to be a tightwad in every single aspect, like down to the point where it just paralyzes you because it is fear-based. That's where I can see that aspect of me naturally being a crutch or being an Achilles heel, because like if I'm not investing into my skill sets and growing as a person, for some people it's like health. Like people like in the fitness industry, they don't want to invest in a trainer or a nutritionist, or they don't want to invest in a gym membership because, you know, it's an added expense and people look at it, you know, more of a commodity based thing versus an investment into their health for the future. And it's one of those things where you've got a scarcity mindset about it now until you've got to be forking over the bill, which I think a lot of people do. They're like, I don't want to invest in that right now, but then eventually end up investing in it at some point later on when they're sick and unhealthy with it. So, you know, scarcity with your energy, scarcity with your time, scarcity with your money, it all kind of comes into a one-way lane of thinking. It's all tied in together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And part of that, I've kind of been watching a lot of stuff or studying this type of thing recently, kind of with that airy-fairy manifestation, law of attraction type stuff as well. But there's definitely some similarities between the two.
Yeah.
And I think the problem that a lot of people run into, myself at times included, is that you let your outside results and environment control your thinking as opposed to the opposite.
Yeah.
So if you're not happy with where you're at and you're looking at all the negatives, that's what you're thinking about all the time. And that's going to produce, take a guess, the same type of result.
Yeah.
So you're kind of staying in that same situation. But if you can have the different mindset of, in this case, abundance, and you think your way into the results, like you're going to think it, or the thoughts that you have throughout the day are going to change essentially who you are and the actions that you take. And that's what's going to get you different results. Mm-hmm. But if you don't start with the thinking, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make a change.
Give me some examples of how you have to be intentional with the abundance and what would be a pretty tactical way or an example of what that looks like abundance wise.
Yeah, I would say focusing on where you want to go, like as far as whatever your goal is, and not looking at you still have to look at the obstacles that are in the way, but don't focus on the obstacle.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're trying to focus down the road as to where you're going, not where you're at now. Mm-hmm. And that makes a really big difference, because you start to have new thoughts throughout the day that'll help you take different action.
100%. I think that too, as we're talking about this, we both grew up in small towns. Mm-hmm. I think that is a prime example of small town gossip. Everybody knows everybody. I feel like in a lot of aspects, everybody is looking through life through a straw, just talking about that mentality, where everybody is focusing on talking smack. I think an example of like a lack of abundance, you know, you're talking smack about people who have differing views, who look at things different than you, maybe somebody that's doing better than you, like you almost feel that they got there from some external circumstance, and it's not because of the work they did and the things that they went through to get there. Like it's just because of something that you couldn't do or that you don't have access to. And I'm sure you see that all the time. And I think even in the workplace now, like you take that small towns, but then, you talk about people that are so scarcity minded with sharing what they have or collaborating in business, right? To where, I see that person just as a competitor. Like I'm competing against them. Like there's only so much room in this marketplace. I want to take that all. I don't want anybody else to win. And I'm going to just focus on me. And eventually that's another thing that might take you to a certain point. But if you want to do big things, and across the board, you look at the people at the very top, they all have a collaborative mindset where there's plenty to go around. There's enough. And if I'm looking to make a big impact, I've got to involve more people than just myself. And if I'm good enough, honestly, then I can get what I need out of this, but also help other people out and bring them up along the way with me. Where have you seen that in business?
No, definitely. We actually both have an example. Let's talk about the gym space for a minute. We both worked at a gym where the gym owner hated all the other gyms that are out there. And it's kind of a silly thing because there's a ridiculous amount of people that are out of shape in today's world, unfortunately, at least in the US. And there's so many potential customers out there that you don't have to hate the other guy down the street that has a gym. You could work together on just getting more people in general into health and fitness, like throwing events together, having collaborations, everything like that. That's going to be a lot better route to take because there's so many people that you're going to be able to help.
And you think about attention and bandwidth.
Yeah.
And when you're focusing so much on not letting other people win or viewing other people as competition and looking and focusing so much on what they're doing, it detracts away from your ultimate mission, right? If you're just focusing on that, it comes back to that theme of anybody that's really talking smack is not coming from people that are above you. It's usually from people that are below you. And I think that, as you grow, if you're putting yourself out there on social media in the marketplace, that's eventually going to start coming in. And the people that you look up to that are maybe 2 steps ahead, that's never coming from them. And that's usually because those people are people that are living with that abundance mindset. They're not in that scarcity mode of, I'm going to take time out of my day and my life. I'm going to focus on what you're doing negatively. And because ultimately, man, you look at those people, and it's probably a lot of our family and friends, but they're focusing so much on that when there is 100 things within their own life that's out of order and that suffers because their time and attention is diverted towards focusing on other people's problems or the things that they don't like about that other person.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you want to, if you're listening to this podcast, then you're probably wanting to create something, whether it's a business or changes in your life or what have you. And if you don't have that abundance mindset of knowing that you can grow and knowing that you can change your circumstances, then you're not going to have the courage to take those steps.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it's one of those things I think that we're not all perfect with. If we were, I think we'd be a step ahead, because I always talk about it my shift towards success was cultivating and growing more of an abundance mindset to where I'm going to collaborate with people. I'm going to spend the money on things. I'm going to take time out of my day and take bets on myself. But also the limiting factor of what hasn't got me to the very top echelon, I know this, is because I still fall back into that mentality in some aspects of my life. There's still gaps and I'm not perfect about it, but just that awareness, I feel is step number one. If you have no idea about any of these concepts, you don't have the self-reflection and the self-actualization of like what goes on in your life and your thoughts, and you're just running things the way that your brain is taking thoughts subconsciously, then step number one for you is probably just recognizing where in your life do you have those thoughts that are going towards negativity, to just talking shit on other people, looking at what other people are doing versus staying in your lane, and they call it getting your house in order. Like if your own house isn't in order before you're throwing stones at somebody else's, that's why it's so hard for me to really have conversations about politics with a lot of people. I obviously have my own beliefs and my own stances on things, but I can't talk to a lot of other people about it because those people, they are in a position where there are so many other things that they could be focusing on to improve their immediate life that's within their control, but yet they are focusing on some politician to come and save them from whatever they're in, which is a scarcity mindset. Like
Absolutely.
tying that back in, like that's a scarcity mindset if you are not taking that responsibility for your life. Because obviously, if you are crying about something politically, I would say that there's some missing element of your life that is going to be shored up. And obviously, it makes a difference to some aspect about the way the country is going, your local politics, all of those things. But I don't think that any president has ever came in and your life flipped 180 when somebody was in office. And most people are still waiting for that to happen. And they're blaming politicians, their bosses, the people that are above them for the reason that they are where they're at. Because obviously there's some unhappiness there. There's some discontent for the way that they're living their life that is just manifesting itself in blaming somebody else or something else, which is easy to do, right? And it's promoted and people stir the pot and the fire in media.
The algorithm loves politics.
Oh, man, it loves drama in general.
It does. It does. And I think that's kind of one thing that also leads into why so many people have a scarcity mindset is because that's what most of the media pushes. And it's triggering, so to speak. And that gets a lot of attention, which is good for whoever's on the other side of that article that's just trying to get the web traffic.
Exactly. But
what are some of the things that have helped you transition from that small town sort of scarcity mindset into an abundance mindset?
Good question. I think self-development as a whole has been beneficial. So, man, there's a lot of great books out there. There's a lot of people that have focused on this stuff from hundreds of years ago. Think and Grow Rich is a great book looking at aspects of human dynamics. And like that book specifically talks about you can get what you want from other people by giving them what they want. Everybody is so focused, and whether you acknowledge it or not, everybody has their own agenda at the end of the day. Everybody's looking out for number one, but if you flip that switch, and you're going to accomplish more things and obtain more success by giving people what they need and what they want. I think a prime example that they use in this book is if there was these kids on the corner smoking cigarettes and this guy didn't want them smoking by his business. And so versus going out and yelling at them, creating a defense response that they got pissed off and they weren't going to want to stop smoking, he brought them out a nice cigar and said, "Hey, I got this nice cigar for you. Would you also mind not smoking there?" And having just that shift in that mindset of not being so selfish with just your intentions first and foremost, giving something of value and giving somebody else what they want eventually leads to that. So I think that having a value-based mindset first and foremost is super important, that you don't deserve anything. Nothing is going to be handed to you in life. So I think that reading books, getting different perspectives from people, because if you're not self-educating or you're not around people that have had that abundance mindset, it's really hard to cultivate it. So educating yourself, being in environments around certain people is step number one. We have something you were gonna
Well,
throw
I
in
was just
there?
going to say, right on that same vein, is that it's not just being around people with an abundance mindset. It's the opposite of that. Of if you're around a bunch of people with a scarcity mindset, they're going to be dragging you right back down to where you were.
100%. 100%. I made a post the other day talking about how, small town, how there's not a ton of like people there. There's not going to be a pro athlete that comes out of my small town. But you go an hour east of there, you've got guys that are going to be first round draft picks. And at the end of the day, like, they're just human beings, right? Like, there might be a little bit better genetics, but the environment of winners versus people that are not necessarily winners. Obviously, they're both playing sports, but the focus on growth and development is so much greater. Going an hour west in the state. I don't know if I said east earlier. Versus, you go on the flip side of the mountains in that small town. It's just a whole different perspective, and that's why I think you see in a lot of areas like people get around either like-minded people, or eventually you adapt to your environment. You stay around a barbershop for long enough, you're going to want a haircut. If you don't want to do drugs, you probably shouldn't be hanging out with people doing drugs, because you could be super strong mentally, but eventually you are going to be the accumulation of the environment and the people that you're hanging around. So, I have, I'm not going to say lost friends, but I've taken a step back away from extremely close relationships, from a friend basis, from a family basis, just because that exact aspect, right? If it is detracting away from my ultimate goal for me and my family, I'm going to love you, but it's probably going to be loving you from a distance, because if that is triggering those negative aspects, if it's bringing me into your drama, man, I'm just kind of feeding into that loop again. And I think that it's going to sound really bad, but for a lot of people, your family is a major cause of a scarcity mindset that leads you into that. And it's just the truth, man.
I think that's goes into a lot of times when you see somebody that comes from a successful family, and then people like to point out and be, oh, you had these resources or that resources, what have you. I think the biggest advantage that somebody would have from coming from that type of successful family often is just the mindset that they have. Like, when you grow up in a household that has an abundance mindset, like, that's just gonna straight out the gate change the direction of your life, really. So if you don't have that, instead of pointing at it and being like, oh, this is why they're successful, you just need to start cultivating that in your own life to fix it for the next generation.
100%.
Because at some point, somebody had to do that in that family, right? Like Ed Milet says, being the one that changes your family tree.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that isn't just in the success, it's in the mindset.
Absolutely, dude. And it's not to say that, like, middle, lower class people, there's people in the trailer park that have that mentality. It's not all directly tied to money, right? But you look at a lot of the people that consume the low level gossip, right? The news, the junk, ETV, that sit around watching hours of these TV shows, which is essentially, drama, right? That's filling their brain with the seeds and the plants of that scarcity mindset. A lot of it tends to be a lot of people that are also monetarily broke. And I think, you can't really separate that, because you look at the people that are also successful. And I've seen that, and I've been around those people, and it's not all the time, but a lot of times those aren't the people that are sitting around watching hours of smut, or that are focusing on other people. Like, they're in their lane, focusing on their mission and the vision to cultivate that. And it comes from an abundance mindset, ultimately. And I mean, the more that you're focusing on that, or you're around it, you notice those trends, right?
Yeah, the more you are thinking about those types of things, you can spot the examples of scarcity mindset or negative thinking, and you can react to it and have a better response. Like I had mentioned, that's something that I've been focusing on right now. And just this morning, somebody kind of like cut me off in traffic or whatever. And then instead of being like, maybe a couple months ago, I'd be like kind of pissed off for like 10-15 seconds. Right.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, they're just trying to get wherever they're trying to go, just like I am.
Yeah.
And it happened today, and it was just like, instead of a response like this, it was just like just a little bump where before I caught myself.
Yeah.
But the more you pay attention to it, the faster you can catch yourself in your own thinking and avoid those negative spirals. Because if somebody cuts you off in traffic on your way to work, and then you're like thinking about it the rest of your drive, that just like starts that cascade of that downward spiral that we were talking about.
100%. 100%. I think that having, like, from a very practical standpoint, really looking at the things at its core that you can control and really focusing on those and eliminating as quickly as possible the things that you can't control, whether that's worrying about them or trying to fix them, and being able to differentiate what that is. I think that also ultimately comes down to an abundance versus a scarcity mindset. Because if you look at the scarcity aspect, it's a lot of things that you can't control, that you're focusing on, that you're worried about, that you're talking about. Like, if you're talking about what somebody else is doing, what somebody else has success in, what you don't like about them, that's nothing that you can control. And you're literally just wasting your time and your precious resources on that thing. So ultimately, I think that having that reminder for me is like, all right, is this actually something that's worth worrying about? And if so, what am I actually going to do about it? Because we just live in a problem society, right? All of these problems, not too many solutions or people that are willing to do that. Right. We love focusing on the wrong aspects. It's not in vogue to focus on the solutions, though. I think a lot of people would be out of business if that was the case. And I think there's a reason so many people are unhappy, right? Because ultimately, like, tying this back to a better quality of life is what this is leading into. And we have so many people that are struggling mentally with anxiety and depression. And that, in my opinion, directly ties into that abundance versus a scarcity mindset, man, of like, you're looking at where either you should be, but you aren't. That's causing you anxiety. You're comparing yourself to other things. You don't have gratitude for the situation, like you mentioned, or you're focusing on so much of what is going on in the world, what other people are doing that's outside of your control, that it's impacting your quality of life. And like, your quality of life is going to vastly improve from what's within your control and taking action with that. And again, like I struggle with that day in and day out. And it's like, that is like, getting that more optimized is what is going to get me to the next level. And I think that, like you mentioned, that time curve, you not focusing so much on that that's a big growing point, right? Because you look at very successful people in whatever realm of life it is, spiritually, mentally, physically, monetarily. Those people have a different gear, like, right, where their problems are probably a lot bigger than ours are.
Yeah.
And they're focusing less on them, right? It's like they figure it out, or it's not, they're just not making as big of a deal. You look at how many people would have got cut off in traffic, and that ruins their entire day. Or they watch the football game and their team loses, and then that impacts the rest of their week. Yeah, man, it's kind of directly tied to your success in life, to be honest with you. Like, you deserve probably what's coming if that's you.
It totally is. And it's not just somebody cut me off in traffic, but it's when you start getting that negative thinking that leads into the next thing. And it's kind of a domino effect. Yeah. And I was watching a Mike Israetel video, actually. He has a channel where he's kind of talking about some more philosophy, lifestyle type stuff. Okay. And he was talking about one of the superpowers that you can have in life is to skip the freak out. And what he meant by that is that a lot of times people run into a problem and then they like freak out for a while, like the world's coming to an end, the sky's falling, whatever, poor me. And then they eventually come around to get into the solution. Yeah. But if you can just skip that section, that freak out section, and jump right to okay, this is the situation that we're in. What action can we take right now to take just that next step? and not looking at the whole mountain of things that you need to accomplish or the steps that you need to take, but just that first one. And the faster you can get to that first step and start taking action, that's when you're going to start to turn around that momentum.
That's good. That's good. Because let's take it to like a different aspect of where I think most people naturally are inclined towards a scarcity mindset. Go to any person's Instagram page with any decent following. They could be doing charity work for all you know. And you go to somebody that has a couple thousand comments on those posts, 90% of them are probably negative.
100%.
Whatever it is. Fitness, volunteer stuff, people that are doing good deeds, there's always going to be people that are talking smack about it, making rude comments, because I mean, ultimately, like the scarcity mindset kind of makes you feel better about where you're at, right? To some extent, it's kind of a coping mechanism as well.
It totally is. And there's also, it gives you an excuse, right? And then you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror quite so much as to why you're not wherever you want to be or what the case might be. Yeah.
Yeah. And those people tend to gather together.
They do.
Yeah. Because, man, if it was that easy to be that person, to have an abundance mindset, you'd have a lot more successful people. You'd have a lot more people that were doing big things, that were doing great things, because that whole concept of who you have to become versus the things that you have to do to reach a certain level, the next level of whatever you're doing in life, is never going to be accomplished without a shift in your mentality, right? What has gotten you here is, for better or for worse, is not going to get you to the next point. And I think that that's where even like abundance plays into the good versus the great, right? Because a lot of people could experience a level of success in a realm of life that's good, but the levels of abundance mindset is giving up the good for the great. Like, it's who really does that? Probably the people at the top of the mountaintop. Like Elon Musk didn't get to where he got by staying within one realm, right? Like, he wouldn't be having the impact on the world if he would have just stayed with PayPal, because I think he was the originator of PayPal, right? Imagine if like Elon Musk just stayed on PayPal. He could have been just fine and rode off into the sunset, but he had to give up a lot of good things to then climb up and have the impact that he's having on the world between SpaceX and Twitter and all of these things. And looking at that of like, maybe you're not called to be continually doing certain things, but a lot of people aren't willing to give up good things in life to get to the great. And it's like scarcity isn't just tied to all the negative aspects of life. It's also like looking at, you might not be where you're being called to be, and it might be a great aspect. You could be in a 9-to-5 job playing for a sports team that's good, but you know deep down that that's maybe not where you're supposed to be. And you could ride off into the sunset for the next 40, 50 years being good, right? Having on paper what would be success to most people. But if you look at the greats in whatever realm it is, they sacrificed good things to get to the great. And a lot of people are probably calling them stupid for doing that, right?
Yeah, when Elon took all the money that he made from PayPal and dumped it into, was it the third launch or something like that? Because it was just the first rocket blew up, the second rocket blew up, and he put everything that he had to try to get that next rocket to succeed. And I think it was the third one that actually was successful on the launch. And if he had a scarcity mindset, well, one, he probably wouldn't have even started to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But at the very least, after that first rocket exploded and he lost however many millions of dollars that
I think it was $100 million per rocket.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I could see that be hard to keep pushing forward. But
yeah.
Just the abundance mindset to have the faith in the unknown and just trust that you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah. Because didn't recently with this rocket launch, there was some aspect where they had the rocket fall back down, right? And it got like captured.
Yeah.
But by a claw or something that allows them to like reuse the rocket. And there was an article headline by a major newspaper, I believe, or magazine, that headline like, "Is Elon stupid?" Like the guy that has in the private sector doing more than like NASA and doing things that NASA has not even accomplished. And he's doing things the world has never seen. And there's still people making headlines calling him stupid with, scarcity mindset, right?
Yeah.
Like it's either jealousy or it's some way of coping because the drama fuels that. So yeah, man, it's important. What are some ways that you're working on that outside of just like reaction based? Is there anything that you were personally looking at doing or trying to with expanding your abundance mindset?
Partially setting bigger goals, so that it forces change. I think we've talked about that a little bit with the 10x is easier than 2x.
Yeah.
Have we talked about that on here?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Just a quick summary of it is that to get to a 10x goal, you're going to have 80% new activities, 20% of the old. Whereas if you have a 2x goal, you can do 80% of the same things, only 20% new things. So setting big enough goals so that it forces change is kind of what I'm focusing on right now.
Yeah, I like that.
What are you focusing on?
Negativity being my first line of thought process, like being really intentional about when those thoughts pop into my mind, changing the narrative because it still creeps in more than I'd like it to. Scarcity when it comes to, being like where I'm at, not being satisfied, which again, it's a good thing to have, but there's also the flip side of that. And focusing more on action is like, I could sit here dwell on this for a lot longer, or I'm going to just continue to action, like getting into action more frequently than I'm focusing just on the problem or the issue that it is. Consuming less of that bullshit because I still fall into the realm of, looking at certain things or, there's this headline, like the entertainment aspect of that. I still fall victim to that. And I think that while I'm probably better than most people, I can separate that line of like, this is not something that's worth my time or attention. To some extent, I still get caught up in it. And I think that that's kind of a superpower of being completely focused on like getting my house in order of like, you can't save the world until everything within your life is for the most part lined up, right? And you've got things sorted out. You are pretty dialed in with all aspects of the core elements of your life, your day, your family, your business, your health, your fitness, and really, really focusing on that. Like I'm in a stage of life just in general of I'm trying to help a lot of what my circle of influences, right? Like my clientele, myself, my wife, my immediate family. And it kind of sounds selfish, but I'm not until like I've gone through this phase in like my 20s of doing that and really get things on par. I feel like I'm not out trying to save the whales. Yeah. I'm not out trying to save the rest of the world because the things that need my immediate attention are more important than like going out to that. I think once I get that really shored up, then I'm going to have the capacity to then go into other things. And so
you got to put your own oxygen mask on before you help somebody else, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's kind of a different way of looking at it with abundance versus scarcity mindset. And I think just, continually investing in myself, betting on myself and trusting the process that this is all going to work out. The only way that I lose is if I stop and if I quit. And having that mentality, I think going into that concept of the negativity, right? Getting caught up in that, not focusing on that aspect of like, 90% of businesses are going to fail. Or, are you sure you want to be doing that? And you don't want to just have a regular 9-to-5 job and be doing what everybody else is doing. Like quieting those voices that always pop up in some extent and focusing on the process. Keep doing what I'm doing. Show up every single day. Consistency. And focusing on the aspects of the 10-year process, right? For whatever it is, the abundance in that and appreciating it along the way, having gratitude for what it is and not falling into fear and negativity. So that's how I'm working on abundance mindset versus falling into that scarcity, because I notice for me, if I'm not intentional, if I'm not putting my actions for like investing into relationships, for how I'm growing the business. If I just leave it up to chance, there's no structure and there's no intentionality with it, I'll fall right back into that hole. And so for me, it's just really being really intentional with actions and thoughts.
I love it.
Yeah, man.
Is there anything else you want to tell the people about scarcity mindset and abundance mindset?
Like anything, man, your environment is going to dictate that. If you are not where you want to be, you got to find a way to get around the people, the places, and the things that are more in tune with that. Because you keep hanging out around negativity, you keep consuming that, it's going to be real hard. It's going to be really hard to do that. And those people aren't going to appreciate it. Like, there's enough people out there, there's enough places that have that now today. I think that's one of the benefits of being so connected, social media, technology. Well, there are some downsides to that, all the negativity that's out there. I think it makes it a lot easier for you to have the resources to do that.
It does, because if you are in that small town or whatever it is, and there's not a ton of people with a really good abundance mindset that you have direct access to, the least you could do is at least cultivate your social media people that you follow and make sure that the stuff that you're consuming is positive and based on abundance mindset.
100%. 100%. So I think that's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to the Forging Alpha podcast.
And we'll see you guys next week.
Peace.